G'day folks, this is a quick introduction before my actual introduction. I recorded that a few days ago. I'm just going to put this up here. Two things. First of all, I just want to say, for those of you who are not Facebook friends with John Young, or who don't have any way of knowing what he's up to, I spoke to him on the phone this morning, and he, as he has put up on his Facebook page, he did get some photos on his trail cams, camera traps, of the buff-breasted button quail. So first of all, I'd just like to say congratulations to John. That makes him the person who has got the very first photo of the two last birds in Australia that haven't been photographed. Buff-breasted button quail, night parrot. That is an achievement that literally can never be achieved again. So big congratulations to him. I know that he's going to head out and try and get some more photos with like an actual camera, some better ones, but he now has the spot. As far as I know, he's shown those photos to Lloyd Nielsen, and that's it. He said he's not putting them up on social media and is going to release them. I think those two are putting together a paper or something or other. Anyway, just want to put that out there. Congratulations to John. A lot of hard work goes into that, and we will, I'll probably get him on the podcast again at some point to talk about it. Until then, the only other thing I want to say, so my introduction is like 10 minutes long, so I don't want to take up this too much time here. The only other thing I wanted to say was I talk about Australian ringnecks in my introduction. Everything I say is wrong, which is good. The ones that I see on my trip are the Mallee subspecies. I saw some yesterday driving home from work, which was still daylight when I was coming back because it started raining. So hence why I could see them well enough. So despite what I say in my introduction, they're not the Portlingon subspecies, they are the Mallee subspecies. That's all. Here's the introduction.
You're listening to The Birder's Guide with Michael Greenshoots.
G'day folks, welcome back to The Birder's Guide for another fortnight. In case you haven't guessed, harvest has started. For those of you watching on YouTube, this is not my usual around the house sort of wear. Just orange high-vis for those listening to the podcast. But I've just got in from work, and this is the first time I've had a chance in the last little while to record my introduction and to edit this conversation. I actually recorded this conversation about 2 weeks ago. Sorry, I'm supposed to be looking at the camera up here, and I keep looking at myself down here. Anyway, recorded this about a fortnight ago with Dean, but haven't had a chance to edit it. So this is it now. Sorry, my son's just driving his trucks around outside. If I get some wet weather and I can find someone who's available on sort of like 6 hours notice, I'll probably record another one and release that. But if that doesn't happen, I've recorded this one, and then I've recorded another episode. They're both on the same day, actually, with Donna Belder, which I'll release probably in about a fortnight's time. And then hopefully I can get some more in between there, but no guarantees on that. So I will say this, though. Sorry, I'm going to hopefully pronounce your name right. Guillaume Dorig is another Australian birder. So he's just started another podcast called Birding Today. When I first heard that it was coming out, I was like, oh, that sucks. Now I'm not going to be the only one. But very quickly moved on from that. I think it's great that there's some more Australian-focused birding content out there. And all the best to him. And with his podcast, maybe we'll get him on and he'll get me on, and we can do an episode together and see how that goes. But it's called the Birding Today podcast. You can find it anywhere that you find your podcasts. He also has a Facebook page, Birding Today, I think it's called. So go and have a listen to that. He's only sort of just started. I think he's got maybe 5 or 6 episodes out. But yeah, while I'm can't keep up with my usual schedule, that might be something you can go and listen to, and then feel free to come back and listen to mine afterwards. But no, good on him, and I wish him all the best. And maybe at some point we can do a combined chat. Anyway, in terms of birding, for myself, obviously harvest has started, so that means I'm stuck inside my truck, which, albeit is a very comfortable truck, but doesn't make much time for birding. So I've given myself a challenge of trying to find 30 species during harvest. So my trip from the farm to the silo is about 20 kilometers, at a guess, 20, 25 kilometers, and hopefully 30 species. I don't actually know how many I'm up to currently. Honestly, haven't had time to sit down and think about it. It's been pretty flat out. So I've got the day off today because the people I'm working for, which are good friends of mine, are reaping lentils. So they're storing all of that in their own silos. So I don't have anything to cart around, which is fine. We're going to go to Adelaide, spend the day as a family, which will be nice. Anyway, birding. So what have I seen that's of interest? We have a lot of bluebonnets on this road, way more than I was expecting. In fact, I wasn't really expecting to see any. So I probably see 20, 25 bluebonnets on each trip. That's cool. I probably see half a dozen ringnecks, which I also wasn't really expecting to see. I thought I might see one or two here or there, but yeah, about half a dozen every time. I always see them when I'm driving about 80 k's an hour down a windy dirt road with blind corners and not a very wide road. So I haven't had much time to actually look at them. I have to sort of like keep an eye on the road in case someone comes around the corner. But I'm fairly sure that the ones that I've seen have been the Port Lincoln subspecies. They just seem to have a very black head. They're usually flying away from me when I see them, but I'll have to pay a little bit more attention to them. But I think they're the Port Lincoln subspecies and not the Mallee. We're sort of right on the border of the both of those subspecies, but we're also on the wrong side of the Spencer Gulf for the Port Lincoln subspecies. Anyway, I think they're the Port Lincoln ones. We'll see. I'll keep a better eye out. When I get down to the silos to tip off the barley, which is what I've been carting so far, there's where you tip off, or have been in the last few days because they've had all the bunkers shut because it's been wet and windy. There is a peregrine falcon nest, which I discovered because one of the parents zipped in front of my truck chasing a pigeon and then returned about 2 minutes later with, I assume, the same pigeon, maybe a different one. And started feeding the young that were in the nest. So they're probably, I want to say, well, they're less than 50 meters from where you park your truck, which is pretty close. I'm sure it wasn't very busy when they chose that spot, but it's very busy now. Anyway, so there's 2 adults, there's 2 chicks. They're pretty old. I think they'll probably start flying in the next probably couple of weeks. So anyway, peregrine falcon nest that I can look at every time I go and tip off some barley, which is pretty wonderful. Also, when you're sitting on the outwards weighbridge, there is a pair. Sorry, there's a pair of masked lapwings which have 2 very, very tiny little chicks, which are very cute. Kids dragging shovels over concrete. Yes, masked lapwing chicks. So I'm hoping they survive, to be honest, because quite often they will like scurry off the road as you drive off the weighbridge to drive past them. Anyway, masked lapwings, 2 chicks, they're very cute. And I think that's probably about it in terms of interesting things that I've seen. Haven't seen any chats, I've seen a few black-shouldered kites. Haven't seen them around for a little while. Anyway, that's all right. So next episode, I'll start actually keeping a tally of how many species I've seen. The next episode, I'll let you know. I would like to before we get into this conversation, just give a shout out to Swarovski for their sponsorship of the podcast. I genuinely appreciate it. I appreciate anybody who helps keep this podcast going, from publishers who send me books to review, or Swarovski who help out. Well, they gave me this pair of binoculars here, which was spectacular. The NL Pures, so they come with me everywhere, including in the truck, which I mean, you have to have them on you. You never know what you're going to see. But at the same time, my truck gets a bit dusty sometimes, and it makes me feel a bit nervous. But anyway, they live inside their bag, inside the truck. So my NL Pures, which are here, and my scope, which lives here, are probably my two most prized possessions in the whole world. Not even joking. I really would like to get the BTX eyepiece, the dual eyepiece. But unfortunately, I don't really have like $4,000 just lying around. So maybe one day. Anyway, thank you to Swarovski for their sponsorship. Muchly appreciated. If you don't have a pair of, well, any pair of Swarovski binoculars, you could do worse things with your life. Definitely recommend the NL Pures. Easily the greatest binoculars I've ever looked through. That's not even. I don't have any sort of requirement from Swarovski to sell their stuff, which is pretty spectacular in terms of sponsorship things. But that's just my genuine opinion. They are the greatest. Now, to the conversation. In this one, we're chatting to Dean Ingwersen about his work with Regent Honeyeaters. He works with BirdLife Australia, that'll all come out in the conversation. But Regent Honeyeaters, yeah. Enjoy the conversation. Chat to you at the end. Dean, welcome to the Birders Guide. It's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Michael. Really excited to be here.
Now, before we get into it, a little bit about yourself. We were just talking just then about your wife getting out the house and meeting some people. Does that mean you're based in Melbourne or Sydney?
Yeah, I'm in Melbourne. So
yep.
We've suffered through all of the lockdowns that Victoria's had imposed upon them. So
yes,
very much looking forward to getting out and about again.
Yeah. Well, I was just reading literally just before we got on here about New South Wales is essentially opening up their borders to international people as of, well, I don't know when, but without any quarantine. So that's good, bad, or otherwise, that's how it's going to be.
It's an interesting prospect that we can travel overseas before we can perhaps travel to Perth or Broome or some of these other cool birding spots we might want to go to. But.
Yeah, that's right. Anyway, so you're based in Melbourne. Have you been in Melbourne all your life?
So I grew up in Gippsland. So my parents were both essentially city people. Although Dad grew up in Wantirna South at a time when it was more, agricultural than it is now.
Yep.
But yeah, I grew up in first few years of my life. We lived in the Strzelecki Ranges out at a place called Murbu East, and then lived in Morwell for the next 20 years or something like that. So I've been in Melbourne for about 20 years now.
Yeah, nice. So we're going to talk about your work with BirdLife and Regent Honeyeaters. Do you classify yourself as a birder, or do you just work with birds?
No, I'm very fortunate in that I'm a birder and I also get to work on birds. So it's that really luxurious position for someone who's into birds to be able to combine your passion and your hobby and work all into one. So
yeah, for sure.
It has that good side of it, but I don't know, ask my wife, and it probably has the downside that every holiday we go on is a busman's holiday where we've got to incorporate all kinds of birding side trips and things onto the end of the itinerary. But
I think most wives and husbands, non-birding wives and husbands, they just accept that every holiday is a birding holiday, no matter where you are.
Exactly.
That's just how it is.
Yeah.
So how did you get into birding? Were you young or later in life?
It's probably both, to be honest. It's with a block of nothing in the middle. So my earliest memories of birding related stuff are my my dad's mum, so my grandmother, who had the market garden in Wanturna South. When we go there and visit, she always had books laying around the house or magazines that were bird related. And I don't know what it was, but I just gravitated towards them. So we'd go and see grandma and grandpa, and I could still have memories of sitting in their lounge room while everyone else sat in the kitchen chatting, and I was flicking through these books and magazines of birds, and she had little bird statues in the lounge room. So yeah, I don't know what it is, but I've always kind of had that natural affinity. And then, as I guess, early age, became aware of it. I remember a primary school teacher, a librarian at my primary school was a birder who I subsequently met only a few years ago. And she was right into it. So she was always encouraging kids to grab the Gould League books off the bookshelves and that sort of stuff. And then I guess through my early teenage years, a mate and I used to jump on the bike and disappear out to places like Tyres and other bits of bush in between and do a bit of birding. And then, to be honest, I was a crap birder. I didn't really know often what I was looking at. And it then kind of translated. So I spent probably 5 years getting into aviculture. So Dad in particular, but my parents, but Dad in particular, were really supportive of that. So we had aviaries in the backyard that, were full of neophemas and native finches and that sort of stuff. So that they're probably my earliest birding recollections and how I got into it. So not typical for a lot of people, but also just that family connection and the link with grandma and whatever.
Yeah. Do you still keep birds of any sort?
I don't know. So since I was probably 16 or 17, Dad had them for a few years after I moved on to other things. But yeah, it's probably that long ago since I've been actively involved in the agricultural side of it, and I probably still have a soft spot, if for nothing else other than as a kid you're like, oh, I'd love to have hooded parrots, but where we lived was really cold and all that sort of stuff. So I still have moments where I think, oh, that'd be cool to have them in an aviary in the backyard. But now I think I'm really more focused on trying to keep them alive in the wild, and still have an appreciation for it, but not actively involved anymore.
Yeah, we live just north of Adelaide, and my neighbour just over the fence keeps birds. And for the first sort of week after we'd moved into our house, I'd keep walking outside and I'd be like, hell, that's a red-winged parrot somewhere. Or, there's a major Mitchell cockatoo somewhere around here.
It's amazing once you get your earring, once you're a birder. Even where we live here in northern Melbourne, where we walk the dog, there's a house along there somewhere that's got a cockatiel. And I can hear it from miles away, and I'm sure most people are oblivious to it, but every time we walk the dog, I'm listening out for that cockatiel. Is it still that one in the cage, or have we got a random that's logged in?
If we had a red-winged parrot turn up here, it'd be something special.
Cockatiel in northern Melbourne would be very exciting too.
So did you so you currently work for BirdLife. Do you have any sort of tertiary education in bird-focused area?
In the previous section, I talked about my early memories of getting into birding was that stuff with grandma and keeping birds at home, and then I kind of went off and did other stuff. So I went and started a human movement degree at university. I was going to do sports psychology. I was going to be involved in sports to some degree or another. And then I deferred and kind of worked with my oldest brother doing a few different jobs here and there. Worked in a water testing lab, and I'm just like, oh, I've got to go and do something else. I feel like, there's something else I need to do. I'm not quite sure what it is. And as it happens, so my wife and I have been together since we were teenagers. We went to La Trobe Uni in Bundoora for an open day, and I'd actually gone along to get all the information on their space science degree, of all things. And as we walked through the biology building, my wife's like, I think you should pick up that stuff on the conservation biology course. I'm like, nah, not for me. And I don't know what it was. Within a month, the switch had kind of gone off in my head that, actually, I'm really into that kind of stuff. And so, I applied as a I guess a youngish, mature age student. So I went back to uni kind of in my early to mid 20s, and did a conservation biology and ecology degree at La Trobe Uni. And as they say in the classics, the rest is history. I had some amazing mentors and lecturers at that university that were just so passionate and so inspirational. And when I went there, I was like, that's it, I'm going to go and work on mammals. They're the thing I want to do. And within 6 months, Mike Clark and the late Richard Zan and a few others had me on the bird track, and I haven't looked back since. So they kind of reawakened the love inside from when I was very young.
Yeah, nice. Talking about your, I don't know whether she was your wife at the time, but directing you towards that path. I was thinking it's amazing how the people who know you sometimes know things about yourself that you don't. I was in a previous life, I was a chef, and only because my mum suggested that I go down that path. I'd loved food and I loved cooking all my life, but had never once even thought about doing it as a career. And she sent me down that path, and I loved it. And similar to your thing. People.
Yeah. My wife constantly reminds me. She knows me better than I know myself.
Yep. So, how did you get into working with BirdLife? When did that kick off?
I guess when I was studying at university, as I said, people like Mike Clark and other lecturers were very big on trying to instill in the students, the undergrads, that having a degree when you come out at the end, particularly in this field, is not enough. You've got to have skills and experience and connections in the industry, if you like, in the sector. By a couple of months in, I was hooked back on birds again. So very fortunate that at that time, what was then Birds Australia, which is now BirdLife, had a head office in Hawthorn. So it was only an extra 25 minutes down the road from uni to get to Birds Australia's office. So I think I might have even been at the end of first year uni, I just kind of hit him up and said, here I am, I'm really keen, I'm interested to help out, what can I do? So I volunteered for a couple of years in the office doing data entry, helping clean up files, helping assist with surveys for orange-bellied parrots, basically anything I could get my hands on. At the same time, there was a bird, what was then Birds Australia's Victoria group, were running a bird banding project in the Rushworth Forest in central Victoria. That the late Joan and Charles Sandbrick ran. So I volunteered on that. So once a month, I'd disappear into the Rushworth Forest and get hands-on experience learning bird banding and all the intricacies of mist nets and all of that kind of stuff. So every opportunity I had, I kind of jumped at in terms of getting hands-on experience and making connections with a network of people. And then, as I don't know, it's luck or whether it's that, that preparation and those connections that you make. As I finished my undergrad degree, I went into an honours year. And because of my connections at Birds Australia, they needed someone to coordinate mainland orange-bellied parrot surveys for that season. So I juggled the two. While I was doing my honours research, I was also coordinating the mainland OBP surveys. And then as I finished my honours degree, there were a couple of jobs at Birds Australia that were advertised. I applied for them both and I got one of them. And I've been with the organisation ever since. So
how long have you been with them now?
So I started in an employed capacity, full time in 2006. So that? I think I'm coming up on nearly 16 years I've been there.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So amazing.
Yeah. So you currently work with Regent Honeyeaters. Before that, did you have any roles or particular projects that you were part of that really stand out as being enjoyable?
Oh, look, to be honest, most of the work I've done at Birds Australia / BirdLife has been enjoyable, and I've loved all of it. My first role after the OBP stuff, so when I started there full time, some listeners might remember that Birds Australia used to have a program called the Threatened Bird Network, and it was really around getting volunteers and community members involved in recovery work for threatened birds across the country. So we were kind of acting as liaisons back then. You know, this is in the dark ages before social media. So it was, you know, databases of people that are interested in going and volunteering, spending their time helping on Western ground parrot stuff and Gordian finch and, you know, arid bird surveys and that kind of thing. So I had 4 years in that role where we worked to liaise and hook volunteers up with all these amazing projects. You know, I got to go and do some of this work myself. I you know, kind of imposed myself a little bit on an AWC Gordian finch survey up at Mornington Station after probably only 8 or 9 months in the job. And yeah, they were all very accommodating, and it was amazing. It was one of my birding highlights, spending a week up there. So yeah, that was my first role at BirdLife, and then probably since then is when I've shifted more into the woodland bird space. So you know, there was funding from the federal government then to do recovery work for Regent Honeyeaters and swift parrots, but that was when the Rudd government had come in. Peter Garrett was the federal environment minister, and there was a really big push to multi-species projects, and so we packaged up a woodland birds for biodiversity project where we'd kind of do some swift parrot and Regent Honeyeater stuff for the pointier things, but we'd also do a range of recovery actions aimed at you know, a broader suite of threatened woodland birds.
Yeah, nice.
And the role I'm in's probably evolved just ever since then, but as part of it since then, since 2009, yeah, I've been the National Recovery Coordinator for Regent Honeyeaters.
Yeah, nice. We have a few people who listen who are not from Australia, and quite a few people who listen who are not necessarily big birders, they're just interested. Can you explain what you classify as woodland? Is that explainable?
Yeah,
without a photo?
Without a photo, yeah. There's a traditional classification that I think comes from the 70s, which is trying to classify habitat based on the structure of it, and particularly how much canopy cover you've got. So for those who know this stuff better than me, and I get it wrong, I apologize in advance, but you know, something above 70% canopy cover with a full tree height is your rainforest of various types. You know, closed canopy, not much light gets through and all that kind of stuff. Woodlands is the open habitat. So I think it maxes out at about 30% canopy cover. So the notion is that it's not mallee, which is your multi-trunked, you know, semi-arid, arid adapted stuff. Woodland as a classification is generally for, you know, trees or really tall shrubs, but you've got open canopy in between the trees. So there's lots of light that gets through. You know, there's understory that's either grassy or shrubby. Yeah, so that's probably my best description of what a woodland is.
Is there perhaps a well-known national park or conservation park that would be a good example that most people would have heard of?
Oh, so it's a little bit hard, because a lot of the places that I work, particularly for Regent Honeyeaters, where you go and do conservation work, a lot of them have been subjected to lots of really intensive change. So if I think of Chiltern Mount Pilot National Park in northeast Victoria, where I've spent a lot of time doing Regent Honeyeater conservation work, yeah, that forest was almost exclusively stripped to bare earth 120 years ago with the gold rush. So yeah, the early literature suggests that, you know, well, you look at that habitat now and it's quite monoculture in terms of the age and the structure of the habitat. So it's probably a bit more closed than you would call traditional, you know, woodland. But that, you know, if you think of that kind of habitat, but in a more open setting, yeah, that's probably a good way to think about woodland. I'm struggling to think off the top of my head of what a national park would be that people might know that has a proper woodland habitat.
That's right. Chiltern's pretty well known.
Yeah.
So Regent Honeyeaters, do you want to give us a little bit of background or just general information about Regent Honeyeaters, habitat, distribution, history, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, sure. Well, without doubt, they're the coolest bird on the planet. So they're great fun to work on. I'm very, very biased. You know, when Europeans arrived in Australia, some of the earliest accounts we have of Regent Honeyeaters in certain regions, in certain seasons, is thousands of birds, like literally thousands of birds. There's descriptions of people riding horses through forests and all they can hear are the calls of Regent Honeyeaters. They obviously, they still moved in a seasonal sense. So they're what we call a rich patch nomad. They will move around the landscape long distances in search of really good flowering events. So things like white box and mugger ironbark and yellow box, these key eucalyptus tree species, when they flower really well in areas, honeyeaters will appear, and Regent Honeyeaters are one of those. They'll move long distances. Again, 200 years ago, Regent Honeyeaters occurred from Adelaide through Western Victoria, up the Dividing Range, north of Brisbane. There's a couple of kind of transient records about halfway up the Queensland coast, but north 100 k's north of Brisbane, maybe a couple 100 k's north, is probably about the limit of what they would have traditionally occurred across. The eminent early ornithologist John Gould had them breeding in street trees in Adelaide when he was in Australia. So they were much more widespread than they are now. So if you think of their distribution now, you could almost draw a line at probably Bendigo would be the current westerly limit, other than the odd transient that might pop up a bit further west, but that's kind of now their western limit. So we consider them extinct in South Australia and far western Victoria. The rest of the range is largely what it was, but the issue now is just the population size. So where people describe thousands, where people described individual flocks of hundreds of birds, our best estimate at the moment is a population of 350 birds. And because we've got so few birds spread across such a wide range, there's a margin of error in that estimate as well. So it may very well be lower. Things have changed a lot in the couple of 100 years that Europeans have been in Australia.
This is a very broad question, but what's the main reason for that? I mean, I haven't heard anything like, no one's using Regent Honeyeater feathers in hats or anything like that. They're not being shot for feathers or anything, as far as I know.
It is literally the really stereotypical conservation issue of loss of habitat. If you think about the kinds of areas that Regent Honeyeaters used to utilise, the woodlands, temperate woodlands of southeastern Australia, in some regions, some catchments have 3 to 5% of that original habitat remaining. Your best estimate in some regions is, 15 or 20% of original habitat remaining. And unfortunately, where those best habitats were, the most fertile soils, is right where we get the best farming productivity. Europeans, with the way they manage the landscape and farm for food and for fiber, those trees, those habitats have been pulled out. For a Regent Honeyeater, you think that they're left now almost with their subsistence lifestyle in terms of the habitat that's left available to them. The interesting thing for me, as someone who's spent over a decade trying to save the thing from going extinct, is what's the difference between them and a yellow tufted honeyeater or a white naped honeyeater or a yellow faced honeyeater? They're still common, in inverted commas. And I think it's just an evolution in terms of the way their habitat preferences work, the way they've evolved to move around the landscape. And then, over and above that, now you have all these other myriad threats that are piling in on top of that, one of which is noisy miners. So, the native noisy miners are a species that have benefited enormously from our landscape changes. and they bash the daylights out of anything else that's smaller than them that wants to crack at the same resources. So not only have regents lost their habitat that was there, what's remaining is often suboptimal, not even because the habitat's not great, it's because it's dominated by the schoolyard bully. So yeah, they're really up against it.
So I read somewhere recently talking about habitat loss. I read somewhere that I don't know if this is even a BirdLife project, but Regent Honeyeater habitat planting restoration, something about it being one of the biggest volunteer efforts in Australia for conservation or something like that. Is that a BirdLife project or?
Not strictly run by BirdLife, but we're through the recovery team. So we have a national recovery team for Regent Honeyeaters that's been in existence for 25, 26 years. There's community groups and other organisations that have done a lot of habitat restoration. The one you're referring to, I think, is the one in northeastern Victoria around Benalla. So there's been this amazing Regent Honeyeater project in the Lurg Hills just outside of Benalla, where they've planted, off the top of my head, it's close to 1 million trees in about 20 years. The focal species being trying to get Regent Honeyeaters back into that landscape. But we've also been doing habitat restoration on the outskirts of the Chiltern Mount Pilot National Park. We've got a 25-year restoration program through the Capertee Valley in New South Wales, which is arguably the nursery of the bird, and certainly traditionally. So yeah, there's lots of work that's been done by members of the recovery team around trying to restore and rehabilitate key areas for them.
So besides habitat restoration, what other projects do you have on the go with Regent Honeyeaters?
Well, I mean, just on the restoration path a bit more, I mean, one thing we've tried in the last couple of years, Regent Honeyeaters are also reliant on mistletoe in certain regions at certain times of the year. And in the Hunter Valley in particular, one particular species of mistletoe gets killed by fire, and we've had some fires go through some key habitats. And in the Capertee Valley, for example, needleleaf mistletoe in the river oaks has been affected by the drought. So for the last couple of years, BirdLife's been leading some trial restoration projects to try and effectively reseed some of these areas with mistletoe. So that's exciting to, it's a different aspect to the traditional stems in the ground kind of habitat restoration plantings that happen. We've been working really hard for a long time. Myself and previous recovery coordinators and researchers colour band as many birds as we can in the wild to try and get a handle on movement, survival, persistence in the population. We've been working hard with partners over the last few years to try and get conservation covenants applied to high quality parcels of property on private property. So that's been a successful program in particularly the Capertee Valley and the lower Hunter Valley. Lots of community education and outreach, trying to get people aware of what's happening with Regent Honeyeaters. And then obviously, captive breeding and release forms a big part of what the recovery team's trying to do these days. We've got a long-running breeding program started in 1995 under the guidance of Taronga Zoo. And since we did a trial release in the Capertee Valley in 2000, and then since 2008, we did 5 releases in Chiltern Mount Pilot National Park in Victoria. And then last year we did a release for the first time in New South Wales in the Hunter Valley. So we've released about 300 birds into the wild in that time, and constantly evaluating what we're doing, why we're doing it, is it working? But it's really hard for a release program for a species like this. They can live for 11 years in the wild. Our longest known movement of a banded bird is 580 kilometers. I've got these amazing examples of groups of birds banded in Chiltern, for example, and one bird turned up in the Capertee Valley 3 years later. A month after that, myself and a colleague found one in Rushworth Forest, and the following year we found one. Another colleague found one in Killawarra, and in each instance they've kind of gone to north, northwest, and west, spread over hundreds of kilometers, feeding on different species of trees at different times. And I kind of make the joke, welcome to Regent Honeyeater conservation, where you're trying to manage multiple sites across different tenures, different states. The challenge is pretty big.
Do you find that because obviously you've got them banded so you can keep track of these things, do you find that wild born birds versus captive bred birds survive longer or do better?
We're still probably crunching the numbers on that a little bit. We know from the banding work that we've done traditionally, the resighting rate hovers around 15%. So 15% of the birds we band and release we'll see again. The numbers have been a little bit higher in recent years. ANU's Difficult Bird Research Group have been doing lots of great work. Ross Crates in particular with his research on the species, he's getting a slightly higher resighting rate. We know the long-term resightings of released birds, again, is around that 14, 15, 16% mark. So we think from that angle, the releases are working well in terms of putting birds into the environment. The resighting rate of them is comparable to, or at least close to, the resighting rate of banded birds in the wild that we deal with. The question really is, you don't want to release birds for the sake of releasing them and then you see them again and you tick the box. They need to be incorporated into the breeding population, and they need to breed themselves either with other birds you release or ideally with wild birds. So again, for a species that's so rare, to get that evidence outside of a release year when we're radio tracking them, it's hard. But we have evidence of birds breeding in multiple years post-release, either with other released birds from their year, with birds from a different release year, but also importantly with birds in the wild. And encouragingly, we've had captive bred females mate with wild males, and we've had captive bred males mate with wild females. So there's a good level of integration there at the moment, but we always want to improve, and we need to improve for the future security of the bird.
So compared to, you were saying that you get a resighting of 14, 15%. Now, to me, that seems very low. As someone who doesn't do any work with threatened species, is that normal for a release pattern for any sort of species, or is that higher or lower than you would expect? And
it's probably about what we'd think is a reasonable return.
Okay.
It's really, it is hard to compare because a lot of other projects and programs that you talk about, the ecology of different species comes into play. So, as I said, the longest known movement we've got is a bird that I banded in the wild that had bred at Eagle Point in Gippsland. And it was seen by one of our volunteers in the Capity Valley 20 months later, 580 k's away. A lot of other kind of critically endangered release programs, I think in a Victorian context, helmeted honeyeaters as the state faunal emblem, a subspecies of yellow tufteds, they're sedentary. So you get the right patch of habitat. They don't move more than tens of kilometers that we know of at the moment. So you basically, it's hard to compare what's happening with a species that covers millions of square kilometers compared to a species that covers tens or hundreds of square kilometers. And I guess it's similar with other recovery programs. I think of New Zealand, things like stitchbird and the robins and other stuff they deal with over there. But it's much easier to get a handle on what's happening when you're dealing with kind of discrete land masses. So that's one of the challenges. But I think at the moment, and the reviews that we've done and have had others do it, the numbers that we get at the moment are reasonable. But we've done a population viability analysis led by ANU this year, and there's kind of a very optimistic path out for this bird, but improving the outcomes of releases and the size of the releases and so on, that's a big part of potentially saving this bird.
What was I going to ask? Lost my train of thought. what's the like long term, so longer than you'll be involved, say, what's the goal here? Do you think you'll ever get back to, flocks of 100 or 200 Regent Honeyeaters around the place?
I'm hopeful. I have moments where I'm really hopeful, but it depends on how I feel on the day that I wake up. If I'm optimistic, I feel like we're doing the right things. It's just the scale and the outcomes that we get. On the pessimistic days, and you see, as an example, over the last couple of years, we've got a new national Regent Honeyeater monitoring program. We've got 1,200 sites across Southeast Australia. We survey twice every spring, set up by ANU and done in collaboration between ANU and BirdLife now. Yep. There's sites on northern New South Wales that were picked 3 years ago as beautiful yellow box woodland, big mature trees, grassy understory near water. Those trees are all dead. We've literally lost potentially hundreds of year-old habitat trees during the last drought. In the run up to those 1920 bushfires. So they're the moments where you go, I don't see this ever turning around. It just feels like the pressures on this bird are just ever compounding. But I guess the eternal optimist in everyone working in conservation is you just keep having a crack at it and hanging in there, thinking that at some point it's going to turn. And as I said, we've done this PVA, the population viability analysis this year. Big releases every couple of years in and around the Greater Blue Mountains region is one part of the puzzle, as well as, again, ANU and other researchers we've worked with, we know at the moment we've got historically low breeding outputs in wild birds. So they're suffering, as well as all this other horrible stuff, they're suffering from high levels of nest predation. So we've kind of got a target for what do we need the breeding output out of every wild nest to be, and then what do we need the release program to look like while we're doing all the habitat restoration and stuff. So there's a model that suggests we have a way out, but it's optimistic, and a lot of things have to go right for us to do it.
Talking about captive breeding, just a thought that popped into my head then. People who are private bird breeders, aviaries at home, breed parrots and finches and whatever. Do you utilize them for breeding Regent Honeyeaters or other threatened species, or is it sort of like a controlled university program?
It's all of these programs are controlled by the Zoo and Aquarium Association. So ZAR is the acronym. So anyone that is involved in breeding programs for things like Regent Honeyeaters or helmeted honeyeaters, orange-bellied parrots, they have to be ZAR accredited. So there's a list of requirements that are needed around quarantine and management and all of that kind of stuff. So there's the age-old argument around getting private agriculture involved in some of this sort of stuff, but for the moment, it's ZAR accredited organisations only.
Fair enough. So the big thing that's been in the news recently-ish around Regent Honeyeaters is the fact, I can't remember who put out the paper or whatever it was, that Regent Honeyeaters are losing their ability to sing, learn their song. Was that a BirdLife study, or was that something that you were involved in at all?
I was involved. So I was a co-author on that study. So the paper was published with, so Ross Crates out of ANU was the lead author. But there are a range of people on that paper that contributed either ideas or data or knowledge. So it was quite collaborative with Taronga Zoo and other Regent Honeyeater experts. And it's an issue. For a long time, we've known, if you look at the early literature in the 90s, Regent Honeyeaters were considered to be able to do mimicry. And I guess Ross in particular, asked questions around that. We all kind of had a think about it. But the thing that we noticed, particularly Ross when he's doing his field work, is that there seemed to be an increasing number of birds that were making calls and songs of other species that weren't Regent Honeyeaters. And so we kind of had a bit of an archive of songs that we had from, late 80s, 90s. We've also been recording some song of wild birds. And then Ross set about, in particular, capturing songs of birds that he was picking up during field work he was doing. And then obviously we have this library, if you like, of birds in captivity that we've got access to all of those birds and the way they sing. So the analysis that's been done and the results show that over time the Regent Honeyeater song is becoming simpler. So they're losing elements of their song, and worryingly, for those birds that are being picked up on their own or a long way from other Regent Honeyeaters that we know of, that's where we're starting to notice this increase in birds giving the songs of other species. And so that, again, the suggestion is it's this loss of vocal culture within this species, that the number of birds available in the population to be tutors for young birds has diminished to the point where, okay, well, I don't have the right people around to teach me how to sing properly. So, sorry, right birds. So I'll pick up other species' song. And so, the question mark around that is, well, what's the consequence? Well, from the analysis we've shown, the consequence is the birds that are making those other songs are actually less successful in terms of breeding. They get less mates, that the outputs are lower. And so if you think of mimicry typically, and this is why it's not suggestive, it's not mimicry. Mimicry is generally the element that gets added to say, hey, I'm a better bird than the neighbor. That's not what seems to be playing out here. And I guess the other complication in all of this is that for a long time we've known that the captive birds don't make the right song anymore. That the captive population was started in the 90s. They've been held in captivity for a long time before we started doing larger releases. And over that time, they're housed in collections that include other native birds, other exotic species. So birds have picked up phrases of noisy pitter and other things. And so birds that we're releasing have a very different song to wild birds, either the traditional song or these what we're calling clipped songs that are losing some phrases. So that's another aspect that we're trying to build into improving the captive release program is, Ross and colleagues are now looking at different treatments within the zoo. We've trialed for a few years, playing proper songs to them. But Ross and a PhD student in particular now are looking at how do we set up the system in the zoo? What's the best way? Is it through just playing songs to them, or do they need a live tutor in front of them, an actual male regent singing the right song to learn from? So it's complicated.
Just to add another aspect to the job, how, I mean, as you say, and it would seem obvious that not being able to sing their own song has an impact on their ability to, I guess, find a mate and whatever else. But how, I don't know if you can even answer this, but what is the percentage of importance that the song has? Do they does the male use the song to find females or vice versa, or is it a courting thing? Or
it's more a courting thing, but also used, I think, often we're finding lone males. So this is another aspect of it, that there seem to be more males than females in the population at the moment. And so, there's an element of that which is trying to find each other. But then, once you have male and female together, that's a big part of his vocal repertoire to be able to woo her, that he's the man for the job. What's the importance of this to the overall recovery of the bird? It's really hard to say. If you said pick the top 3 things to work on, it's really hard. You know, there's so much interplay between all of the different elements that we're trying to work on. So how it plays out in terms of the long-term trajectory of the species is really hard to say at the moment. The critical thing is that we've worked out this is an issue. There's something happening in the wild. Our captive birds don't quite sound right. We've got to put steps in place to fix that.
Yeah.
How that happens, how long it takes, I don't know. In the interim, it's still probably a numbers game, just trying to get as many birds released as possible and deal with the fallout as we go. Yeah.
So does BirdLife or any other organizations you know of have anything new and exciting or potentially game changing in the pipeline that you're looking at working on, or is it just a matter of solidifying what you've achieved so far?
Well, as I said, I mean, the PVA was really encouraging in that it kind of reinforced that what we're doing as a recovery team, BirdLife, all of the things that we're implementing with federal funding, state funding, working in conjunction with local land services and others, Taronga Zoo's breeding, research we're doing, ANU and others. So we're all kind of doing the right thing. Are we doing enough of it? Are we getting it exactly right? So now's the time where we kind of, not navel gazing, but just reviewing a few of these things. One thing that we are working on and very hopeful to get going soon is there's always been an element with Regent Honeyeaters. So I joke that, in a traditional sense, it varies a bit geographically, but they're largely a spring breeder, other than they can start a little bit earlier in Victoria. But once the breeding season finishes, particularly these days, I have moments between January and let's say April where I struggle to know where a Regent Honeyeater is anywhere in the landscape. They literally disappear on us. And we've kind of got theories on where they might go and what they might do. But the technology, we've tried radio tracking before, but it's just not up to snuff. So what we've got our hands on at the moment through some support of Friends of AWC and some other federal funding is some satellite transmitters. So that technology has now improved to the point where they're small enough to put on a bird as small as a Regent Honeyeater. So that we're ready and basically ready to go over the course of later this year. Start deploying a couple of satellite transmitters, and the beauty of these things is they've got solar panels on them. They talk to satellites, so you literally catch the bird, stick the transmitter on, let them go, and then you go back to your office and do your field work from the computer. So we're really hopeful that provides us with that insight into where they go in those months where they disappear on us. But also, importantly, as I said, that some of our band re-sightings of both, captive release birds, for example, we've had one bird just turn up in Wangaratta in Victoria, seen in private property, and it was released in a captive release in Chiltern in 2015. He was seen again in 2016. He turned up again and tried to breed a few times with a couple of different females during the 2017 release. He then tried to breed in Wangaratta, adjacent to some private property. He then vanished. And 2 days ago, he's turned up again in Wangaratta. So we've got this 4-year gap. I've got no idea where this male's been. What's he done? Which part of the landscape has he utilised? Are there parts of the landscape that that we need to think about managing that we don't at the moment? So really hopeful that this satellite tracking stuff can answer that. You can get multiple fixes per day. You can literally track the bird as people have seen with godwits and seabirds and all of that kind of stuff. To have that technology now able to fit on a Regent Honeyeater is really exciting.
I think that'll be fascinating to see where they go, for one. No one knows. They just disappear. So it'll be really interesting to see what comes out of that. So my last question around second to last one around Regent Honeys, is there anything else that you think would be worth mentioning that I haven't asked already?
I've probably covered off on all that we do and why we're doing it and what we're trying to achieve. I guess I'd just like to say for people that are listening, that Regent Honeyeater conservation in particular, and woodland birds in general and other species, but I'll talk specifically about regents. There's an enormous amount of community involvement and effort that has gone into trying to save this bird, and it cannot be underestimated and understated. If we touched on the habitat restoration work that we've done, that's all volunteers. That at best there's a paid coordinator that might pull these things together, but it's then 150 people from Sydney that come to the Kapiti Valley twice a year and they plant 5,000 plants. That Lurg project is 20 or 30 something thousand people have kind of walked through the door and planted trees, and sometimes in torrential rain and hail, and then I think about the releases in Chiltern, for example. We'd have 150 or so volunteers each year come and do hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of labor. So I guess I'd just like to take the opportunity to acknowledge that, and for people that are listening, it's an enormous collaborative effort from a range of organizations, and we're all working really hard, but we can't do what we're doing without that support of the community.
My last question was going to be, and still is, there's a sparrow pecking at my window. For people who do want to volunteer, or is there anywhere in particular that they can go? And the second part of that question, do you do any fundraising or sort of anything like that if people want to donate to the cause?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, BirdLife Australia, employing me as the recovery coordinator, we're always seeking people if people would like to donate to Regent Honeyeater conservation, they can do that, and they can direct BirdLife to use that donation for woodland bird conservation or Regent Honeyeaters. If people want to donate their voice, we think of BirdLife, you donate your voice, your time, or your dollars. In terms of the things you can do for a species like this, or all the work we do at BirdLife. So, donations are always welcome in terms of financial contributions, but, we run campaigns around critical issues like Warragamba Dam raising at the moment. Potentially floods a really important Regent Honeyeater breeding site. There's other contentious developments that we're always after people to voice their support of and opposition to for those things. And then time. And I guess that's been the really hard thing with this COVID stuff for the last couple of years. We've had to cancel tree plantings. We've had to, cancel bird survey weekends. But if people Google BirdLife Australia Regent Honeyeater, hopefully it'll get you through to the right part of the page where you can either get my contact details or find information on some of the recovery actions that we've got going that people can get involved in, like those tree plantings and survey weekends.
Well, I'll find out where to go, and I'll put it up in the information on this podcast if people are interested.
Awesome.
But Dean, thanks for giving us, I don't know, probably about 45 minutes of your time. It's been good chatting, and all the best moving forwards with saving some honeyeaters.
Fantastic. Thanks, Michael.
So thanks for listening, everybody. My next conversation is with Donna Belder, which I mentioned previously. So that'll be coming out at some stage in the near future. Hopefully, if I have the time, I will record some more. If not, happy birding over the next sort of 6 to 7 weeks, and go listen to the Birding Today podcast. And I'll put up a link in the show notes to get you to the Facebook page. And happy birding.